friends. I'm your host, Erin Port, and welcome to the Simple Purposeful Living podcast. Life can be overwhelming and busy, so once a week, I invite you to join me, and together we will make simple tweaks to uncomplicate the hard parts of our life so we can spend more time doing what we love. As we step into the new year, I know so many of you are feeling that familiar tug, wanting to make this year different, to finally focus on what really matters, but feeling overwhelmed by even where you start. That's why I'm excited to have today's guest, Dr. Sarah Hart Unger, to share with you today. Sarah is a pediatric endocrinologist, mother of three, and someone who truly understands the juggling act of balancing career, family, and personal dreams. She hosts not one, but two podcasts, her own Best Laid Plans and Best of Both Worlds with Laura Vanderkam, which is how I was introduced to her. Sarah's been helping busy women like us find calm and intentionality for over 20 years. Her brand new book, which I just read and love, Best Laid Plans, A Simple Planning System for a Life. Her brand new book, Best Laid Plans, A Simple Planning System for Living a Life That You Love, shows us how to stop running on autopilot and create a plan that leaves room for what matters, including rest, fun, and those meaningful moments we don't want to miss. Whether you're a natural planner or someone who's always said, I'm not a planner, Sarah has wisdom and encouragement for you today. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Oh my gosh, Erin, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here.
It is a joy and an honor. And for my listeners who might be new to you, can you share a little bit more about yourself, anything that I forgot in the introduction, and why you're so passionate about planning?
Of course. So, yes, I am a physician and mother of three. I'm also married to a physician who's a vascular surgeon, and we live in South Florida, and we have a busy life, just as you do. If you are listening to this, I am sure all the trappings of three active kids, plus jobs, plus passions and hobbies and friends, and all that kind of stuff. And I became fascinated actually during my residency training when time was incredibly limited on how I could, best leverage my planning techniques to ensure I was still getting to fit in some fun in my life. And honestly, during those days, I had to be really, really creative. Like I might only have one weekday off in a 12-day stretch or something like that. And how was I going to make sure that that day contained a lot of the fun things that I wanted to do, plus keeping up with all the, regular life activities during the work days. And I just began to iterate and read everything I could about planning. And I felt like at that time, there was so I've been blogging for 20 years, since 2004. But at that time, there was a lot of mommy blogging, and I was super interested in it. But there wasn't a lot of women, especially, talking about productivity techniques that we could use in our own lives to, again, ensure that things ran more smoothly or that we could do more of the things that we love. I saw so much more of that in the kind of bro-dominated sphere. And so my interest just continued to grow. And when I started to talk about those things, I would post little pictures of my planner, back in the day, and people were like, oh, I never thought of setting up a list like that, or ooh, I want to get that one too. And I just realized I love talking about it. I love learning about it. And I guess that's where my niche kind of was born. And then fast forward to the pandemic, I was working and I was already loving the podcasting world, having started Best of Both Worlds with Laura Vanderkam 3 years prior. And I had some extra downtime actually, because I was seeing patients kind of from home, but the hospital wasn't allowing us to work at full throttle since I wasn't, I'm not an ER doctor or infectious disease or one of those kind of more essential specialties in a pandemic. And so we had to take a day off per week. And I was like, I'm going to start another podcast because I need a distraction. And I'm going to talk all about planning and see if anybody wants to listen to this. And I did planner reviews and talked about planning techniques. And it turned out I really loved doing it, and that there was definitely an audience for all of the planner content. And so here we are today. Everything's kind of grown and evolved from there. But I'm still so passionate about how we can refine our own planning techniques and personalize them to make our lives work better, which is really the end goal.
Which I love because for you, planning isn't the end goal, like you said. It's an avenue to what you really want to do. And I'm all about intentionality. And so what you share is this idea of like, we really have to plan for what matters or it won't happen. And I think that's for a lot of people going into 2026, they have a lot of goals and ideas. But what you share in the book is okay, now you have to have a plan for how you're going to do those things, which seems obvious, but we oftentimes miss that.
Yeah, and it has to be an effective plan that you're going to want to use that fits your lifestyle. And I even coined a term called meta planning, which is kind of like thinking about how you do your planning. And in a way, that sounds silly, but I also think of it as like making sure your tools that make life work are effective. And the analogy I came up with more recently is like a chef sharpening their knife, right? Like the point isn't to have a sharp knife. He's not going to wave his knife around like, look what I can do. But sharpening the knife enables him to be able to go crazy in the kitchen and chop up all the things that are going to put together this delicious, intricate meal in the end. And the time that we spend thinking about planning and doing our planning, that is our knife sharpening for the rest of life.
It's almost like the return on investment too, which I won't steal all your tips because we're going to get to that. But in your brand new book, Best Laid Plans, you emphasize planning at multiple levels, which I found really fascinating. You kind of start at the macro level, the yearly, then you go to seasonal, monthly, weekly, and daily. Why does this zoomed out to zoomed in approach work better than just keeping a daily to-do list?
Yeah, daily to-do lists are awesome, and I totally understand why people make them. And in fact, I do make them, but if we're only making daily to-do lists, we're not doing that in-depth, like real self-reflection with ourselves to figure out what we want over the long term. We're going to get caught up in, I need to buy stuff for tomorrow's science fair project for my kid, right? We're not going to be thinking about, I want to research spring break destinations for 4 months from now, or whatever something a little bit more longer term might be. And by having different time horizons at which we plan from yearly to daily, we can ensure we spend a lot of time every year thinking about what we really want,
Mm.
a moderate amount of time every season thinking about what we want, and then kind of scale the length and the kind of complexity of your planning ritual to the time frame so that every day you are creating a to-do list and you are doing some planning, but you're not giving yourself the short shrift when it comes to really having that reflective time about the bigger things that you might want to accomplish as well. And by looking at your weekly list every day and your monthly list every week and your seasonal list every month and your yearly list every season, and I promise that sounds more complicated than it actually is, you will ensure that your really big goals, you're not going to lose sight of them, but you're still going to have time to remember the minutia like the science fair kit tools.
Yes, yes. I love that. And I think like it's almost like when you're going on a trip, right? If you have to have like an end goal in mind, you have to have that big planning in mind so that you know where you're headed. Otherwise, you're just kind of darting here, there, and everywhere. You might take a really random route or you might not get to where you want to go, right?
Totally. So like your daily list is I guess kind of like your Zoom map directions, but your yearly planning is like where are we actually going on this trip? I
I
like
love
that.
that because, and that ultimately for like to focus on what matters, you got to know what matters and where you want to go, which is important. But we often just, I think, as busy women, we get like you talk about in the book, like reactive, like oh, there's just things, you talked about the very beginning of the book, the ranzoni noodles for the science fair, right? Like we all have it, like it's just like constantly, you feel like you're constantly putting out fires, whereas planning helps you to feel less reactive and more proactive, which just makes life feel a little less stressful, or let's be honest, a lot less stressful.
Yes. Yeah, we have to have a really kind of robust system for capturing all the inputs that come at us all the time so that we're not living in that state of constant like, oh my God, I forgot about this and now I have to deal with that. Like they're kind of two separate things, but they're both really, really important. And yes, there is an anecdote about ranzoni noodles for a physics bridge project, and that was definitely real life. My poor now eighth graders, sixth grade science teacher will never live that one down. I'll have to give him a copy of the book.
Yes. But one of the things, so speaking of the ranzoni noodles that you talk about, and I'm big on tiny tweaks, like small steps people can take to get better at planning. And one of the things you talk about is having a master calendar, which seems obvious, but like you said in the book, somebody might have the school calendar and the work calendar and their spouse's calendar and the soccer calendar, and they're all in different locations. And can you talk to us about what this master calendar is?
Yes, it is worth taking time to A, figure out where all of the various calendars in your life lurk. Like, and there are some really sneaky ones, I think, especially in parenthood. Like, if you have kids doing sports, it's like those separate apps which will have stuff pop up. You really need some place where everything can be integrated to avoid surprises. And it sounds very basic, but we don't always take the time to collect exactly where we need to look to integrate everything. And then you should make a conscious choice over where you want everything to be integrated. Could be paper, could be digital, could be, shared with a partner if that's how you want to do it. There are so many great solutions, and I do not want to tell anybody which one or technique they should choose, but I do recommend that everybody kind of has one place they can look to find anything that is time specific in their lives or even in their kids or partner's life if that affects them directly as well.
I think that's so important. And something I have an Apple calendar, and something that my husband and I got into the habit of with, like you have a 13, 11, and 8-year old. I have 16, 14, 10, and 8. And their schedules, his schedule depicts when who's picking up when. And so we got into the habit of like on my Apple calendar, we invite each other to things that will affect the family, which is helpful. And like you said, having that master calendar. So when you go to the orthodontist and you're booking an appointment, you know what's okay. Am I working today? Who can take the kid to the orthodontist? Do talk about that as well.
Totally, all of the logistics. And well, I don't want to skip ahead, but that also requires some communication a lot of the
Yes.
times because having the calendar is one thing, and everybody being on the same page about the calendar is another thing. And one thing I'm really, really passionate about is to, if you have other people in your family, if you're not operating in a vacuum, that there is some kind of formalized communication that goes on between you and all of what I call stakeholders.
Mhm.
Sounds very business, but that's okay. Every single week. So it can be as simple as at Sunday dinner, we all review the calendar and look to see if there are any conflicts. Your kid may then raise their hand and be like, oops, I forgot. I have this kid's friend's party on Tuesday. And does that work? And that gives you a chance to figure out, yeah, can this work? And let's put it on the calendar so we all know about it. And then, in addition to a discussion component, it's really good if there's something indelible. Well, I don't want to mean inchangeable, but something that everyone can refer to just
Mhm.
in case a couple days go by and then there's like, well, you said this. No, I said that. It's like, okay, if we have one place we all know that we can look at, then we are unlikely to have these kinds of conflicts because, I snapped a picture of the whiteboard to everyone and everyone has it on their phone. So we're all on the same page.
I love that because you talk about that with your weekly plan, that it needs to be discussed, like a verbal discussion, and something that is visual that people can refer back to. Where do you keep yours? Do you do a screenshot or do you keep it on the fridge?
So we're not digital for this. We're analog digital because I do take a screenshot. So we have an Erin Condren weekly whiteboard that's like probably 10 years old at this point. That's just the days of the week. Now, I would not call that my master calendar, but it's kind of our family's master calendar of comings and goings. And that is what we refer to when we kind of talk through our week every Sunday. And we do try to do that Sunday dinner. It also has what we're having for dinner. It has every kid's activity. It has who's driving from school, who's picking up. With both of my husband working outside of the home several days per week, we also have a nanny. So once I create that calendar for the week and we all talk about it, I send a picture of that now to two of my kids who have phones, my husband and our nanny. So like all of us can refer to that on the go. Of course, if a change gets made, then you have to, resnap a picture and send it. But usually by Sunday, most things are set. And so, yeah, that's our kind of verbal and analog/digital communication plan that we use in our household right now. And that may change. I think as my kids, especially my youngest, as she gets older, I could see us all moving to something more digital. There are some really cool like products out there. Like I know a lot of people are loving the skylight or the deck board or the Hart. So, I am open to lots of different tools, but I think the approach will be similar. Reviewing everything together and making sure we can all see it somewhere.
And I love in your book, you talk about that. You say it's not about, and I feel the same way, it's less about the product and more about the process. So the product could change based on the season, but really this just cuts down on so much miscommunication, forgotten kids, right? All of those sorts of things.
Totally. I mean, I love products, and I think I had to come to this a little bit on my own. Like, it's like, oh, I'm going to find the perfect planner, and then everything's going to become more easily. Then I started kind of experimenting with, let me try this kind of planner, and let me try this kind of planner, and was like, you know, things work as long as look at them every day, look at them every week, all that kind of stuff. It's about the rituals that you've put together around planning, and it can fit in all kinds of different boxes that suit your aesthetic or just how you're feeling in a certain season. And certainly there's some, products or tools that like work better during certain times. I always use the example that when my kids were babies, I hated having a daily planner page because I'm like, what am I going to put on here? I'm just like feeding the baby whenever. And so I really prefer to have just a weekly during those times of life. But like, you can experiment and still figure out the processes and rhythms around planning that work and still play with the tools.
Okay, so so let's talk about planning a little bit more on like a granular level. Let's go to weekly planning. We talked about the
Sure.
communication plan, but you also share this concept of generating a master list of weekly tasks that you reference throughout the week. Walk us through kind of what is on that list and how that works and why it's effective.
Yeah, so I think you're referring to my idea of like a weekly operations or having a weekly review process that doesn't just involve, okay, what are my tasks going to be this week, but also involve like, what are the things that I personally need to set myself up for success this week? And actually, in my book, I give people tons of options for things they might want to include as their weekly operations, and they're going to vary. I do not recommend that, I probably have like 15 things in there. No one needs to plan 15 aspects of their week, but like you look at that and you figure out which ones work for you. So like for me, I do think a task review is essential. So I always go back to the prior week's task and I look at my monthly goals and I craft my weekly task list from that. But in addition, I always plan my meals for the week. I plan my exercise for the week. I look very closely at my kids' activity schedules for the week to see if there are like any issues or any craziness. And those are the main things that for me are like essential part of my weekly operations, in addition to my communications plan that I talked about. But, for other people, it might involve like which household tasks you're going to do which day. Maybe you like to have that set. Maybe you really like to have your outfit set for the week. There are so many different variations on what could work for an individual. But in order for you not to forget a step, it's really great to decide, okay, these are the things I need. And then even like throw them on an index card or a post-it note so that every time you're planning for the week, you can ensure you include the things that are important to you. Maybe after a while, you won't need the little post-it note, but it can be a really helpful scaffold if this is a ritual that you're just trying to get started with.
And I love that you said that you plan exercise and you plan meals, like these things that like we want to happen, but oftentimes if we don't plan for them, they just won't happen. So do you put like what exercise classes you're like at, like I mean, I'm just curious because for the person that's listening that's like, okay, I want to exercise more in 2026, but I didn't ever think about planning for it. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, I have my planner next to me, but I think it's going to be too blurry. Yeah, sorry. Blurred background. Darn, I can't give a visual aid. But yeah, I actually write down, so my relationship with exercise is a little complicated. I used to be a runner, but I had a major cardiac event last year and I'm not actually able or allowed to really run anymore, but I still am very passionate about getting activity in and being able to do what I can do. And so I will mark off for the week like, oh, Monday and Friday are Pilates days, and then like Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday and Sunday, I hope to do like a 30-minute strength video, and I'll write which ones I plan to do for the week and check them off as the week goes by. But there's also the action where I'm like planning that. So on a Sunday, I'll be sitting there and thinking, oh, I can't go to Pilates on Wednesday because I'm on call and I don't want my pager to interrupt me. So I have to put that on Friday, or, that's just a random example. But I really think ahead as to where that is going to fit. I believe it's like at that weekly level that our big picture goals often become tasks that are like, ready to be built into your day. And it's very true. It is one thing to put on your yearly list, get in shape, but it's like the act of actually like putting it into writing onto a specific week and then onto a specific day that actually makes these goals turn into what's actually on your calendar and what's happening. So yeah, exercise is such a great example there.
I love that. And such a good reminder to plan for it and like think about your schedule and then put it on the calendar. And I don't know if it's just the planner in me or if you get this too, but like once it's planned and put on the to-do list, like I am much more likely to do it than just like in my head, that's a good idea. What about you?
Yes, much, much more likely to do it. It primes me to figure out, oh, where in the day does it actually fit? I do think like sometimes people do struggle. Like people will tell me, oh, I struggle with putting things on my list and then feeling like I have to rebel against them. So there is a bit of a personality type thing here. If anybody's familiar with Gretchen Rubin's personality types, she has this framework that has to do with like which expectations do you respond to? And people who are upholders and questioners tend to respond to their own expectations of what they want to do. But people who are rebels or obligers are more likely to not. So you do have to do some self searching to figure out what types of planning works for you. Some people might actually feel much better about, like, oh, I'm going to do 3 exercises for the week. I'm going to write them down so that I have a commitment to myself, but I want freedom as to how I execute that. And if you have that kind of a personality type, that might work better for you. But then for many other people, putting it on a day is really helpful. Or for people that really need outside accountability, maybe they text their calendar to a friend and say, this is what I'm going to do. I want you to nag me if I don't do that, or I want you to meet me at this class so we do it together.
All great ideas. I love this. So many tiny tweaks to make you successful. And for the listener, it doesn't just have to be exercise. This could be reading or it could be anything that you want to do more of, like you said, but making those big goals a reality at the granular level. Okay, so speaking, you kind of talk about this. You call out a major pitfall. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, that people don't actually schedule time to plan. And so, you've talked a little bit about the knife sharpening of like thinking how you plan, but you talk about on a daily level that you kind of bookend your days with 10 minutes at the beginning and 10 minutes at the end. And you talk about how that's so valuable. So can you talk about that ritual of 10 minutes of planning at the beginning and 10 minutes of planning at the end and what that looks like?
Yeah, I it's funny. I feel like I've spent a long time convincing people that if they often are like, I want to plan, and I'm like, well, when are you going to do it? And they're like, oh, I don't want to, commit. I'll just fit it in there. It's like, no, just like anything else, like an exercise class, like, driving your kids to school, like anything, planning does take actual tangible time, and it's important to think about where that actually fits into your day. I often find actually like people with really young kids, if they work outside the home, sometimes the planning is better off done once they get to work versus, at home when they're attending to their young kids' needs, etc. So you really do want to reflect on when works for you. For me, my kids are a little bit older now, so I do tend to plan first thing in the morning. And honestly, like the first thing I do, I get my coffee and then I go to my desk and then I pull out my planner. I usually turn back to the day before to make sure I kind of processed everything from the day before, because I'll get to my bookend at the end of the day. I'm not personally always as good about doing that, although I think it can be a wonderful ritual. But I start my planning by looking back, okay, anything like unaccounted for from the day. I set up my planner page with look at my weekly task list, look at my calendar to see what's coming, and I use those two things to be like, okay, this is how much time I have, this is what is due, and this is what I'm actually committing to on my list. Um, and I put like space for my little habits. I have a little habit tracker that I put each day, basically to set myself up for success for the day. And I don't even think it takes 10 minutes at this point. It's more like 5, honestly, unless there's something really, involved that I hadn't processed from the day before. But it really, really sets me up for success. And it's so much better than jumping into the day, without a framework. Because if I just do what I kind of feel like doing based on vibes, it's unlikely that I'll make as thoughtful choices. I'll probably just go for what seems like the easiest, or I'll just check my email and see what's in there and react to what's there. And of course, stuff is going to come up. People are always like, but what about, I get a meeting invite that I have to attend and it's not optional. That's at 10:30. Totally reasonable. We have to do our best to estimate how much time we're going to have available in a day. At a certain point in life, you kind of know how likely you are to be surprised. And you also can get better at not overloading yourself. So you're not going to choose tasks that are going to eat up every moment of quote free time that you've identified in the morning, because some of that free time is going to get taken up by, okay, your kid like forgot their ID and needs you to drive it to school or something like that. So, I'd say one hack is to plan in a little bit less than you think is actually going to be realistic. And then as for the end of the day, again, I don't always personally do this myself these days, but one really great thing to do, especially if you want to really minimize that morning setting session is just to take a moment at the end, look at your planner page and figure out what wasn't completed, to kind of acknowledge what you did do, and then make sure that it's still accounted for either on your weekly list, or maybe you already start your next day's list. And then you can feel at peace with some of the loose ends, because I don't know about you, but I always have some loose end. I
Mhm.
actually, Laura Vanderkam and I differ on this. She tends to make lists where she generally does everything on her lists. I make lists where I do like 70 to 80% on my list. And for me, that has served my purposes pretty darn well. And if I get too perfectionistic in thinking that I should do everything on my list, I actually kind of run into like just frustration overall. So for me, being happy with like, oh, I got most things done and I can migrate two of these 8 things to tomorrow is a really nice happy medium.
I love that. And like moving something to the next day. Do you
Yeah.
ever run into, I sometimes will run into things where that one item just keeps moving from day to day to day. And then you kind of have to reconcile, like, do I actually even want to do this task? Or if it's like, for me this week, it was taxes. And I was like, I have to, I don't want to
You
go to
have to.
jail, but like, I'm just going to force myself to do it. But right. Do you ever have those kind of things
Oh
too,
yeah,
where they just
totally.
can't
Actually,
keep,
I have there's a whole chapter on like like dealing with those goals that are just like not moving.
yes.
My example for my own life would be like estate planning. I had it kind of like on the list for so many years and so many seasons. I'd put it on the list, and then I'm like, well, that doesn't look fun, and I'm probably not going to die anytime soon, so we'll just table that for later. I do feel like you have to really do deep dives when you're doing that and figure out what about the goal is making it so sticky. For me,
Mm.
it's usually that it's like emotionally fraught. So something like estate planning where you don't like thinking about it. It's really vague. So you're not
Mhm.
clear as to what the first step actually is. And that maybe you need some expert help. Like maybe you don't actually know what to do because you are not a lawyer and you don't know how to estate plan. So for me, something like that, it was like I had to come to terms with the idea that I needed to hire an expert. I needed to create a deadline. Like we were like, okay, we're meeting with the expert on this day to sign the documents. What do we need to work towards that exact day? And we blocked time off from work. So it was kind of high stakes. Like if we had had to move it, it would have been a pain. And I swear, I think that's what got us through. And then also just being really like, okay, what is the first step? Let's make it really tiny until it's
Mhm.
not so intimidating and I don't want to, take it off my list. That said, sometimes it is a goal that you put on your list and you keep moving and you can let it go. That is
Mhm.
not taxes and really not estate planning, but like
Yeah.
many other things. It's like you kind of can search your soul, and maybe it is optional, or maybe you decide this is still a goal for me, but it's not a goal for me in this season of life, and we can just put it on someday maybe, and then like think about it in the future.
I love that. Such good reminder. Okay. So, let's see. I want to ask you for the person because I hear this from people a lot because I tend on the type A, right? And I hear from my type B listeners. They're like, "But I'm just not a planner. Like I just am not." And you actually address this resistance in your book, and I love what you had to say about it. So, what would you say to the person who says, "I'm not a planner"? And what's the simplest place that you would suggest they start?
Yeah, so planning, I believe, is a learnable skill, and I'm gonna give Lisa Woodruff, who runs the business Organize 365, credit for that concept, because I think she always says like organization, household organization is a learnable skill, because it's true. None of us like grew up thinking, oh wow, I naturally know how to like get my kitchen in order, or things like that. But we figure it out, we learn it. Maybe we watch an expert, maybe we read a book about it, maybe we just paid attention to what our neighbor or our mom does. But these things are things we can learn, and planning is just like that. There's also just like letting go of the perfectionism. You do not have to, embrace my multi level system exactly as I do it. You can try one thing. Like maybe you
Mhm.
will put on the calendar to do a little seasonal goal setting session with a friend or a partner where you just come up with a few things that you're excited about doing in the coming months. And then you make a deal with yourself to set an alarm on your phone that says, look at your seasonal planning list every 2 weeks. Okay. That would
Mhm.
be like a tiny, tiny minimal system that you would set up that probably would really increase the likelihood that you'll do some of those things on that list because you'll be seeing them regularly. So I would say start really, really small, and don't hesitate to look for, inspiration in other sources,
Mhm.
like maybe the Best Laid Plans book, but of
Yep.
course, other people as well. Find out how your friends plan if you feel like they have everything together. Ask them questions. I know that for me, it was always like, ooh, is that your bulletin board? How do you
Yeah.
guys do that? Like, you can learn a ton from how other people do things.
I agree. I think it's so fun to learn. And for me, you don't have to do it all the same way, but you're like, oh, that's a good idea. Or I'm going to file that away for a different season. Or, oh, even like rereading your book as a planner myself, I'm like, oh, yes, I need to. I got back into the habit of I do a 10-minute at the end of my day. And so to plan for the next day, because I just sleep better. I feel like I can close the door on work and be present with my family. And so even tweaking it from your beginning of the day to saying, I'm going to do that at the end of the day. Just remind, as I was reading your book, I'm like, yes, I need to reinstate that habit.
I love that. Yes. And personalizing is key. And if you're like, oh, that sounds great, but it would never work for me at that frequency, then you figure out, oh, let me find a variation that I could try. And also having an air of experimentation, right? So let's say you
Mm.
tried the morning and you were like, that wasn't good. Let me experiment with the evening. Oh, this works way better.
We get in this idea as adults that we have to be perfect out of the gate. I think that that's something I work with the women all the time is like, but it didn't work the first time. I'm like, but then we iterate. That's the whole point of tiny tweaking is like, okay, it didn't work, so let's tweak it to try this or tweak it to try that. And the beauty of it is you can try it the next day and see if that works, right?
I love it.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I asked these two questions to every podcast guest because I'm just a curious gal. But what is a tiny joy that you've enjoyed lately
Okay.
besides
This one,
planning?
yeah, of course, planning. But I have to say, it has been like a shock and a thrill for how many people have sent me pictures of my book in like on the beach and on a cruise ship and like their 80-year-old father reading it and like their baby playing with it. So, that has been my tiny joy. So, I guess that's I don't know, a little bit specific to me, but it has just been like way more joyful. And I'm not someone who does social media. So I guess maybe this is something that is common when creators put things out there, but I didn't know. And it was such a fun surprise. So thank you to anyone listening who did that. And if you ever have a friend or if Erin, when Erin brings things out in the world, know that you will bring a creator lots of joy by giving them feedback. Doesn't have to be me, it could be anyone.
I think that I was going to say, I think that that's a good reminder that encouragement when when you see something or you have to say something, because I think everybody needs a little more encouragement in the world today. Such a good reminder. Okay. And then because I love tiny tweaks and small iterations, what's a tiny tweak that you've made recently that simplified your life?
Yes, I'm going to share that I incorporated picking nights for date nights into my monthly planning. And I realized that we had stopped doing date nights because we did not need a babysitter anymore. My oldest is almost 14. She's like fine to babysit every once in a while. And I didn't recognize that it was the act of reserving the babysitter that was forcing us to carve out time, which we love our date nights. And we're like, wait, what happened? We now have a babysitting age child and we stopped. So I incorporated the little tweak of as I did my monthly planning, let me pick 2 nights ahead of time. And we're back to date nights. So yeah, super great. And it's had a big impact on my happiness with just a few minutes of extra time spent planning.
Ironically, that's one of our 2026 goals because I think it's because you have teenagers and their lives dictate your life a little bit more, their schedules. And we found that in 2025, we went on way less dates. And so I said to my husband, I was like, okay, we're getting back to at least doing one, if not two dates a month. And we put it on the calendar. We planned for it because we plan for what matters, going back to what you preach.
I love it.
Oh, Sarah, this was a delight. Of course, we're going to share your book in the show notes, how everybody can get it. Like I said, it had so many good reminders. It was so inspirational to read at the beginning of the year of just like, oh, yes, this is why we do what we do. But where else can they find you on the internet? I know you don't do social media, but I know that you're other places.
Yes, that is, I know, a controversial but conscious choice on my
I
part.
love it.
Although I love how people like you are putting out good stuff into the social media landscape. So I have two podcasts, Best of Both Worlds with Laura Vanderkam, Best Laid Plans with just me. And then my website is the Shoebox, TheShubox.com. It's kind of an old school style blog. You get like a little bit of everything. Honestly, if you have never read blogs, and I feel like there are probably a generation of like Gen Zers in there who are like, what even is that?
Yeah.
I recommend. It's a much more personal glimpse into someone's life than your typical social media. Well, actually, they both can be. But anyway, blogs are a fun alternative, and you can find all my stuff, my courses, my newsletter, my reading list, everything at theshoebox.com.
And it's a joy to read. It does feel a little more personal, especially yours. Like when I go and read it, it just feels like I'm reading like a friend's update. I hope that that comes off as a compliment because I mean that to be. Yes.
It totally does. Thank you so much.
Well, Sarah, this was a delight and an honor. Congratulations on your new book. It is a wonderful one and one that I know will bless my listeners. And I hope that today, as you listened, you think of a tiny tweak. Maybe it's the master calendar or spending some time with your spouse or stakeholders to discuss your weekly plan ahead of time. I promise you, it will cause a lot less friction in your life. All right, friends, until next time, remember, you don't have to overhaul your life to love it when one tiny tweak will do. If you liked this episode, it would mean so much if you'd share it with a friend or leave a quick rating and review so others can find our show. Until next time, you can find me at Simple Purposeful Living on Instagram and Facebook.